Okay. I hope that it's recording to the cloud.
It's recording.
It is, and I hope it's to my computer. I think it has to be with the Zoom room. Okay, so I'm gonna read this, and then I want to hear your 10 minutes, and then I want me and Tish to just ask you all of the questions.
That's fine.
So, as a Greenville native, Lauren Stevens feels joyfully compelled to invest back into the Greenville community, into the community that has given her so much. She is a graduate of Clemson University and soon to be, very soon, a graduate of Leadership Greenville Class 47. Her professional leadership experience extends beyond the Salvation Army in her role as vice president of the Greenville Chapter of the Upstate Continuum of Care and the incoming chair of the Greenville Homeless Alliance. She is supported and encouraged to follow God's call by her loving husband and high school sweetheart, Caleb, and their two daughters, Piper and Hollis. Lauren's youngest daughter, Hollis, has had a long journey with multiple health issues and was diagnosed with Autism Spectrum Disorder in July of 2020. Lauren has used her professional perspective to bring those hard-fought lessons to her personal life as she navigated a new sector of our health system with her young daughter. You'd think at this point, Lauren had plenty of advocacy opportunities, but there's more. In October of 2020, Lauren was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The backstory of how Lauren found her way to the social services sector started while working during college at the YMCA Judson Community Center. The first summer there began as a convenient and interesting job that quickly turned into her passion. The next 2 summers were answers to a calling. After college, Lauren pursued her passion for social services at Safe Harbor, a nonprofit organization that serves victims of domestic violence. Stepping into the role of Director of Social Ministries at the Salvation Army in 2014 was the next step in God's plan for Lauren. Framing her work around the philosophy of person first, she has transformed the campus at the Salvation Army to a place where clients and residents are treated with dignity, respect, and able to create belonging. It is a place where nothing less than respect and kindness are tolerated. Lauren oversees the Women and Children's Shelter, Men's Shelter, Dining Hall, Food Pantry, a team of resident advocates, and provides the community level involvement for her department. With humility and love, she walks alongside people who are often at rock bottom, ministering to them and helping them discover a new road to stability. Advocacy is not only Lauren's profession, nor her passion, it is the sustaining characteristic of life for her family. The humility and grit that Lauren approaches life with are the outcome of the lines of her story. Lauren credits an incredible community, a strong connection to family, and her faith as the sustaining features of her story. So, reading this particularly out loud, because I skimmed it earlier, but now that I'm like reading it and reading it out loud, I have so many things flourishing in my head, and I actually do have like 2 very specific questions for you. One, I can tell that you are like an actual writer, that you write things. But even throughout this, like when I read it, and like when I'm reading it, I kind of like take a step back and like I don't like see you as this person like that I'm friends with. I'm like, I'm just reading this like piece of paper, right? This person on this piece of paper.
Right.
And like it's so clear how even in spite of like some very, very challenging circumstances, and I would use a different word if this was not being recorded, of just like really, really hard things, that like I can read this and know that there is still a level of like hopefulness and like gratitude almost, right? Like I'm like, as I'm reading this, I'm not like, I don't read this bio and think like, oh, this person's life has some real like intense challenges right now. Like, and you talk about it, but there's something about it that's just like, and this paragraph about your work at the Salvation Army, and I really do have a question at some point about it. There's this part of me that wants to, like, I have like quotes and stuff all over my wall. There's this part of me that wants to like put this somewhere. So when I'm feeling like, I don't know, like feeling like it's like we're on this cycle of things and it's never going to get better. It's never going to change. That it's like, wait a minute, things actually can happen and change. And it doesn't always have to be the way it was, because like, oh, look, you know, the Salvation Army's culture is, and I don't know what it was before, but
rough.
the way that I read this, I know there's something. So I'm going to stop talking and see if you want to kind of start, just if you want to start sharing something, like things that you have thought through, or if you want me or us to ask you questions, because I'm good with either.
So typically, I told you earlier when we were talking about this, I don't really prepare anything because I just rather just kind of ramble. Tish knows this all too well, and I'm sure y'all know Taylor does. But I think part of what I'm trying to like work towards, at least in my capacity here, is also sort of mirrored in like just life in general, which is just trying to, if you want people to show up for you, you have to, you know, find it in yourself to show up for them. And I kind of did that backwards. And so when I first started working here, and I'll kind of, you know, allude to your question about, you know, potentially your question of like, what do you mean about how you've changed it? When we were, the Salvation Army purchased the Gateway House, the old Gateway House that sits on Rutherford Street. So we now own 415, 417, and 501 Rutherford. We're monopolizing homelessness over here in this neck of the woods. But we are cleaning out the Gateway House today because we have some tours with our advisory board over the next couple of weeks, and we don't want them to think that we squandered their investments. And so we were going through it today, and we have, in my opinion, the strongest staff that we've ever had in my time here right now. We have incredible professional staff that are just really invested in what we're doing. And I'm confident in saying that 6 years ago, they would not have worked here. There has been such a deep dive that has taken place since 2014 of just, you know, realigning ourselves with not the mission of the Salvation Army. You can meet needs and treat people like garbage. That, you know, you really can. You can give someone a bag of food and treat them as if they don't exist simultaneously. And, you know, what we started to do, you know, almost 7 years ago was taking the time to understand folks, taking the time to meet the people.
Oh, God, I'm going to put you on mute if that's okay.
We took the time to hear their story, and which made everything take a lot longer. But when you invest in that instance with a person, and you invest in their experience with them, and you show them that you're not here for just the checkbox of stats. I mean, in my job interview for the job that I have right now, I told them your numbers are going to go down if you hire me. And I just need for you to be really comfortable with that. And they looked at me like I had 7 heads, and my sort of expanded upon, you know, breakdown of that is that, you know, it's going to take longer and it's going to be more intensive with these individuals, but it's because I don't want to ever have to serve them again. I will serve them again. I don't want to have to do it. I want to meet the needs that they are presenting with, the ones that have reached their highest level on their list. And then I want to get to know them, and through loving them, figure out what is 4 and 5 on your list. Like, what else is going on? Because, you know, number 1, 2, and 3, those are critical. That, you know, that's the critical mass component. That's to make the gunshot wound stop bleeding, but you have to also think about the leg you're trying to save. Right now, you gotta, you know, you have to address those, you know, the first things are first. And doing that was a really big investment in the culture of, when you live in a world where everything is sped up to hurry up to get it done faster. And I'm sitting here preaching, we need to slow down. We need to spend more time. We need to have more people. We need to spend more money and lower the amount of outcomes. And people are looking at me like, you do know this is the world, right? Like, that's not how it goes. But it was just these small decisions over time that that have really worked to correct a long-standing complacency of how it is that you help people. And so, the three things I guess I wrote down to kind of share with folks was, number one is that you need to create a space to belong. First, you have to create the space for yourself to belong. And then you can invite people into your belonging and help them create space for their belonging, so that there's always a creation of belonging and space. And then the second is to be authentic, even when you're by yourself, but especially when you're not. If you can get really good and comfortable with your awkward and your weird by yourself, guaranteed you'll be more comfortable with your awkward and your weird with other people. And then the third one is that never make a list of things that you will not do. Only have a list of things that you will do. And honestly, don't even keep a list, because, if you're not, I won't ask anyone to do anything that I'm not willing to do myself, at least in my capacity here at work. I will ask my husband to kill a spider in a shower. I'm not interested in doing that. But through sort of a professional lens is I will sort moldy bread in a food pantry. I will knock on doors at a motel. I will work in a shelter. I will go on the disaster canteen. I will hand out Christmas gifts. There is not a single part of anything that I oversee or participate in that I would not do myself. And, I lead from the middle. To me, leadership isn't linear. It isn't me in the front and everybody behind me. It's, me in the middle of everybody else, and we're going together to the same place. People's steps might be different than mine, and they may change mid-course, but as long as we're all going in the general same direction, I think we can cast a wide net and try to get people to jump on board with us and stay on board. I think it's the keeping people on the boat that's sometimes the challenging part of it. But so yeah, if I would be happy to kind of answer questions if y'all had them. I mean, y'all know me pretty well, so, and I'm painfully transparent. So
well, I mean, I know at least for me, I know you will, but I've not ever sat down and asked you the sort of question I'm about to ask you, because there was one already in my head and you talked about it a lot, but then as you were talking, there were other things that I wanted to ask you about, because I am in the business of helping nonprofits specifically and organizations be better, right? And so all of what you're talking about are all of the things that I sit around and think about and talk about on a pretty regular basis. And it's funny that you started with belonging, because my doctoral research is on belonging in nonprofits. So that was very exciting for me. So for me, I have multiple questions. I have one about belonging, but I also have one about you. At the end, you said you lead from the middle and leadership isn't linear. So there are a million definitions of leadership, depending on who you ask, but how do you define leadership? Leadership is ...
I would say, and I don't know, this is probably someone's quote. I just hear things and pick them up. I'm a sponge and I have a photographic memory, so I don't, but then I'm dyslexic. So there's this whole little fun part about it. But so for me, I actually have it on a sticky note on my computer right here in front of me. And it's leadership is not an expertise. Leadership is a constant education. And, I've been Leadership Greenville this year. And interestingly enough, I'm not learning a whole lot about being a leader in Leadership Greenville. I'm learning more about who you'd potentially have to lead. I feel like that is more so the point. We're not all of us are going to go into politics. Not all of us are going to be running companies. Not all of us are going to be executive directors. Some of us will be. And I think it's really important to understand sort of your constituents, to, understand and appreciate, make space for the experience of another. I think we talk about a lot is sort of, holding space for pain, but I like to create space for the healing. Because I have a thing in my office I'm looking at right now. What part of your story was you? Because I think when we talk about the hurt all the time and we don't ever make space for the healing, I think that we can get lost in the hurt and how it's ambiguous, and sort of, if you walk around with hurt wings all the time, you're only going to pick up things that are hurtful, and they confirm that in you. And
you're saying so many good things. Thank God that you supported. Oh my God, keep going. I'm like, I could write everything. Oh my gosh.
But, you know, for me, all of my entire perspective, all of it, I give credit to a really tremendously hard childhood. And it wasn't hard on the outside. Anybody looking at it be like, what is she talking about? You know, I was upper middle class. We had tons of money. We had tons of access. We had all kinds of things, but I couldn't read at like 8. And I no one could figure it out. They got me glasses because certainly she can't see. You know, they put me on, they tried all these sort of medicines because I couldn't sit in my chair, but it was because I didn't belong. I didn't connect with a teacher until I was in the 3rd grade. No one made a space for me to exist until I was almost 9. And I didn't belong at home because my sister is literally the definition of perfect. And then my dad was just so disappointed in my existence. And so then I just had like my mom, who's like the greatest cheerleader ever. And she loved me exactly how I needed to be loved. But when there's more around you confirming the negative, you tend to believe the negative. And so that is, I've sort of always not gravitated to the underdog, because I don't think that that's a fair sort of analogy to use, especially with people. But I always seem to gravitate to the folks who never had it very easy, even if it looked like they should have. So, you know, I looked like someone who should be able to learn in a general classroom. I looked like a person who had books in her home, because I did. I looked like a person who was read to as a kid. I looked like everything that wasn't transposing into a classroom. And so when I met my teacher, her name was Miss Norman, I'll never forget her. You know, when I met her, she saw something in me that I'd never heard before. And it was that, just, you know, she told me when I was in 3rd grade, she said, just because you can't sit in your chair doesn't mean you don't belong in my classroom. And so just kind of making the space for being different, even when every available box didn't give you a different definition. And that's kind of when I didn't know I was developing sort of this perspective of, you know, how people talk about, we need to build bigger tables. We need to, you know, I just started bringing my own chair. I'll sit all over there. I don't need to sit at the table. I just want to be near the table. I'll bring my own chair. I'll sit on the floor. I've very much been known to do that. And I think that that's kind of what ended sort of this sort of childhood to adulthood saga, was figuring out that there are so many people who don't have a chair. And there's so many people who will never know the table even exists. And, you know, for me, I needed someone to make space for me to belong. And so the sort of the push of who I am professionally is to create a space to belong, because if you don't belong, nothing else matters, because you can't make it by yourself. And if you can't find belonging, you are completely by yourself. And when I see people eating in restaurants alone, I can't deal with it, because I want to go sit with them, because it bothers me that you're by yourself. And my husband, who is very much an introvert, he's like, Lauren, some people like to be by themselves. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine such a life. But he is a saint also. But, you know, I think that with this work, you know, to know that there are people that we know and have come to love deeply in our experience working with them professionally, that they go weeks at a time without someone saying their name, that they are invisible to people. And to know that, you know, for many years of sitting in the classroom, I never raised my hand. I never got called on. I wasn't bad. I wasn't your typical ADHD kid. I sat in my chair quietly because I was humiliated. Because I think I think it's Simon with Sinek. He says something about vulnerability is you creating a space where I'm comfortable enough to say, I don't know what's going on. And that to me was a lot of years in a row of everybody else understands it and I don't. I'm not going to ask a question because they don't ask a question. And so what I've come to harness in sort of my professional experience is I'm going to ask the question because I guarantee you someone else in this room wants to know that same answer. And I gave up asking why 2 years ago for Lent.
What did you do instead?
I asked how.
Uh-huh.
So like, how does this end up? How does this go forward? How can I, how can I help you achieve this now with us changing it in these ways? How do you think this will yield a better outcome? And so
what was that like for you?
It changed how people responded just in general. It was when you ask why, immediately the amygdala fires up. Like, why are you asking me that? Like you get defensive. And asking questions to me is very different than questioning. And that was something that I have learned, in the last 6 years or so about myself is that I really don't like to be questioned. I love for people to ask me questions. And so I try to create a space and an environment and then sort of the vernacular that I use and the body language and the goofiness and the sort of table setting of the relationship and the expectation of the relationship has sort of yielded a really good space for conversations. And relationships are the most important thing to me. And even if they're meaningless, the investment will end up making something meaningful. And, I think that you just got to break down that edge a little bit to get to the heart of someone, because it's, there is good in every single person. That's what I believe in.
So when you talked about you talked about when you came in and you were trying to switch the culture, you talked about you like slowing people down, right? And being, being authentic and creating like that all of that stuff kind of slowed things down. And you also talked about understanding your constituents, like having conversations, getting to know people, right? Did you, when you started kind of specifically talking about, let's take the time to get to know our clients, have conversations with them, that sort of thing, that specifically, did you have any pushback or resistance, pushback from, the staff or the culture? And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah. So when I started here all those many years ago, it was very much push a button, give a thing, push a button, give a thing. And I just felt, and we served the same people, and I just felt that we were missing something. And so when I started to ask questions about, how do we work with folks? What are the goals? And then when people started giving me these canned result goals, I was like, well, there's our problem. It is, it's outcome driven, when outcomes are definitely a part of what we do, but it has got to be person centered. It has to be about the person, their story, their walk. What is it that we can do to support their journey? If they said, when they came in that their goal was to save $5,000, then that's their goal. If they have to get a GED, if they have to, pay off tickets, those are things that will happen in order to get to the $5,000 savings. But let's just acknowledge that that's their goal. And I think that just acknowledgement is a huge piece. We also just sort of like from day one instilling a lot of dignified aspects to process, that there are limits on certain things that we can do or I wouldn't have a job. But there's also, I'm going to help the whole person, even if it costs more money. And, that is like a shock to some systems where it's $150 and that is how we assist you. And I was like, no, because they need $425 because $150 doesn't help. And so it's just sort of retraining, I guess, sort of the folks that look at the lines, and then I started to weave in the very necessary aspect of the story. Because if, stats, and data, they make people understand, but the story makes them care. So if you can't make someone care about an issue, you certainly can't get anybody to help you fix it. And then just sort of, physically going under bridges and, sitting with people and talking to them about things that likely don't exist, but to them, they're very real. And just being with people, that has always been in my career, allowing people to be exactly what the moment is creating, I think has been a critical component to how people are able to change their lives here. We could band-aid the problem. We could, meet the need, check the box and keep it moving, wash, rinse, repeat over and over and over again. But I want you to fall down and then show me what you've learned about getting back up. I think that is such a big part of doing life with people, is the acknowledgement of tripping and falling and hitting slap on your face. Because that's where real growth comes from, is having to change it up. And I think, for me, changing the culture, I turned over 100% of our staff. I terminated all the staff after 6 months because they weren't getting with the program. And they still, even with me looking at it, they still were treating people as if they didn't matter. And if the person doesn't matter, the work is meaningless. And so I cleaned house and just rewrote the program and put the person at the absolute center of it. And every time someone wanted to make a rule, I asked them to explain to me why they wanted to make a rule. And we have very few rules. We have conversations, and we have relationships, and we have expectations, and we have reciprocity in relationships. There is a dependency on one another. We have community, we have belonging. We create these things inherently on this campus, because if we want people to go replicate what we've taught them and, rebuild families and reconnect with loved ones and create families and all these various things, we have to show them how that's done. That's a soft skill that I think we take for granted, and we try really, really hard to do that here. And of course, we miss the mark from time to time because our product is a person and not a widget. But more often than not, we see incredible outcomes because we give people space to fail. And there's no punishment tied to failure here. There's just consequence, which is gravity. You go out and get drunk, you can't stay here. That's a consequence. We don't crucify you and tell you can never, ever, ever come back here again. No, we just say you just can't stay here right now because you're drunk. And we got kids here, and we got people on the, they're holding on to recovery with the tips of their fingernails. And so, you change the nature of this dynamic. So there's a consequence to that. We'd love to see you when you're ready to do it again. And just, loving people first.
So what sort of, from an organizational perspective, what sort of support did you need and obviously get to come in, basically completely reshape a culture, like overhaul staff? Like, what was required from an organizational perspective for you to be able to do that?
There was a little kicking and screaming in the beginning, because what I was talking about doing was radically different than any other sort of Salvation Army unit in our territory. Because I was very, very happily going into a tornado. And I had to sort of so our process is about as bureaucratic as it comes, but you propose the new program layout and it goes to our division, and there's a lot of people that look at our division. There's various social services folks, there's employees, there's officers, there's lots of things. And then they sort of give you a rebuttal and they ask you questions about it, which I appreciate, because it kind of makes you more firm in your decisions. If you can defend them and you still make sense at the end of it, you're probably in pretty good shape. But so in that process, we reshaped the shift culture, how we do shift work. We took more people to full-time work. We raised the pay. We did all sort of those structural things, because your wage is indicative of your value. And we are the mission of the Salvation Army, this department is, and we can't be the lowest rung on the totem pole. We can't, and then expect the highest yield out of everyone. And if I want you to treat someone with dignity and respect, and be cussed at and have urine thrown on you and be followed to your car and all these things, I had better show you some level of value. And when I couldn't pay them what they're worth, I invested in who they are as a person. And I just spend time with people. I get to know them. I, take pictures of their families. I don't care if you're late for work. Did you come to work? Like, I mean, it's these things like, are you here now? I'm so glad you're here. Like, don't be stressed out because you're late. If you're coming, and it's fine. Life happens. You're a human. And my staff loves to say, I hate to bother you. And I'm like, you literally don't bother me. None of you bother me. This is not a bother. And I mean, when I say, this job is one of the greatest honors of my life, is to get to serve in the capacity that I get to serve in here. And the organization sort of just like wildly supported it as soon as they saw it sort of take shape. And it took a minute, but now it's, well, you need to talk to Greenville. Well, you need to talk to Greenville. And you have all these sort of instances where, that organizationally, no one had the boldness to reinvent the wheel. But, we had to here. I think it took a native getting in this seat. I think it took someone who knew what we had to lose. And I couldn't know I didn't try harder for the people that I serve. And then I was, I really was, and I had a pit in my stomach for a year and a half, and I cried every day before I went to work, and I cried the whole way home because it was so much, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I believed in what I was doing. I had no, evidence that it would work. I had nothing. I just knew what I thought folks deserved, which was dignity, it was respect, it was space, it was belonging, it was accountability, it was love. And I knew that I wanted those things, and those things have come very easily to me. And so everything else that was hard, I knew I would figure it out. But it was those, those sort of inherent characteristics that I've tried to sow into every single thing that we do, because, every decision I make is a form of communication. And I'm not top down, I'm not front to back, I'm middle out. Where, if I am unwilling to do it, I will never ask you to. And I have always acted as if, I want to be who I would want to find on my hardest day of my hardest week and my hardest month of my hardest year. I want to be that person. And so when you mimic that and you try to inspire your staff to be that too, you really do get the best of everything, because you're a mirror to your staff. And I've been followed to my car. I've had, people pull various forms of weapons on me when I'm holding them accountable. I've been called lots of things outside of Lauren, and
everything but a child of God, as they say.
Let me tell you something. And I've served people I went to high school with. I have served members of my own family. All of these things are just the catalyst to keep going forward. And then the humility that comes with it is, obvious. It's easy to see that. But when I've always involved my family in the work that I do, I think
Talk more about that.
I think it's critically important to raise children in a world where they have a stable life, but they understand that is not a constant. My life was it was financially stable as a kid. It was, textbook, normal white America, middle class, check, check, check. I mean, there was turmoil, trust me, but I never went to bed hungry. I never wondered where we were going to live. I always had clean clothes. We had a dog. We had all kinds of stuff, right? Very stable. And then my parents got divorced when I was in high school. And my dad took his 6 figures and left very quickly and easily. And then we were left without it, but had the whole life of it. And so as a teenager, all of our stability was gone. And so I was old enough to know better and to understand, like, okay, well, this has to change, but still you're young enough that you just don't understand it. Like, you really don't understand money. You don't understand how it all works. And so it was sort of like that later in life humility that was been developed through sort of that lived experience of I've had everything and then some, and then nothing, and, hiding a car so it doesn't get repossessed, getting on food stamps, all which are very foreign to me at this point in my experience, to then dedicate my entire life to sort of making that connection with people so that they can believe that they don't have to live like this. And for the season of life that we had to live like that, it was a very big character building experience. 3 years after that happened was when I showed up for my first day of work at Judson, and met a little boy named Gabriel and his brother, and those 2 kids single-handedly changed the rest of my life. Gabriel had holes in his shoes. His mom had cut them because it made them bigger. She made like an open toe sandal for his shoes because they just didn't have any money at the time. They were on their second day of living at in the GAIN shelter program. And I think I was 18 at this point. And I went on my first lunch break. I didn't have any money, but I didn't care. I went on my first lunch break and I went up to Hibbett, and up at Cherrydale, left Judson and went up to Hibbett Sports up here, and bought Gabriel a pair of like Nike shoes, because I knew that if I went to Walmart and just got in those, just sort of kick around shoes, he was going to be just as different to everybody else in those shoes that fit and had a closed toe and all that than he would be wearing the don't fit shoes. And he needed to belong. And so I got him new shoes, and I pulled him aside, and I tucked him in his backpack, and I said, if you want to put them on, you can. If you want to wear them tomorrow, you can too. That's completely up to you. I'll let you make that decision, because I didn't want him to feel even more different. But I knew he needed shoes to wear. They didn't fit, and we were going to play kickball a lot that summer, and he needed to be able to launch that puppy. And so he needed something with a toe that he could kick. And so he was like, can I go put them on right now? So he ran and he put them on, and he came back out, and everybody in our group, there were, I think, 18 kids. They were 6 and 7-year-olds. And I was the only white person in the gym. And I preferred it that way. And all of the kids knew that he was so proud of those shoes. And so they walked up to him and they were like, hey man, I really like your shoes. And you could see like his shoulders sit up a little bit more, and just sort of, and he was one of the guys. He belonged at that point. Sometimes it's something as simple as a pair of shoes and the dignity to put them on yourself and nobody make a big deal out of it, because my understanding, at least from my faith, is that you do your good deeds in the dark. You don't call light out to them. You don't do them in the middle of the city. You do them because they're the right thing to do. And I didn't need a thank you card. I didn't need a big parade. I got a kid a pair of shoes because he needed a pair of shoes. Some people will be like, look at these shoes that I got you. Look, friends, look at these shoes. And that makes me want to act in a violent way. Not fair. And so that one experience, I went back to Clemson that fall, and I changed my major from economics to sociology. I studied race and the family structure. I studied, race and class and the differentiation between the two. I studied the historical context of race and injustice, because it mattered. Those kids at Judson changed my entire life. And my youngest daughter, her name's, and I didn't really piece all this together until about 5 years ago.
Really?
And yeah, until about 5 years ago did I really lay it all out there and figure out, because I didn't love Lauren then. I hadn't come into loving me yet. I believed the lies my dad told me, believed every one of them. He was very convincing. And as I had my first daughter, Piper, and we were, didn't know what we were doing there either. But then when I was pregnant with Hollis, it all started to kind of just piece together. That was really when the department kind of took its own flight. I had some advocacy staff. I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing. The Salvation Army was more respectable, in my opinion, as a provider of services here in Greenville. And my husband and I talked about it. And, I said, if it's a boy, I want to name him Judson. And if it's a girl, I want to name her Hollis. Because that place, it changed every single thing about me. And, so that's why, with Leadership Greenville, our project was the Judson Community Center. And I don't think my team could have chosen a different project. I don't think I would have been okay with that. But it matters to remember. It's important to remember details about a person, about their story, about how they got here. But it's so much more important to give space for who they want to be, where they want to go, and to nostalgia is a dangerous form of comparison. Queen Brene says that. And it would be so much easier to run this department the way that it was when I started here. Absolutely, it would be easier. But I refuse to ever allow that to happen.
Yeah, go ahead, Monty. You got a question? Yeah, go ahead, girl.
So, Lauren, through all your experiences and dealing with people of different cultures and conditions in life, how do you feel about the work? And I know we don't have a lot of time left for this group. How do you feel about what do they call it? Toxic charity.
That's a good question. I definitely think that toxic charity kind of falls in that buzzword category a little bit right now. It's kind of been very pushed into sort of the conversations. And I think it has done a good job of grabbing people's attention and being like, well, I wonder what that is. And I think that I don't believe in the sort of the bootstraps mentality of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because a lot of the people that I know who deserve a second, third, and fourth chance at things don't have any boots. So you kind of have to start at an even lower level than that some of the time. But other times is that folks just need to be held accountable. So it's kind of 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, where you have, young folks, especially your younger demographic, where it's just a bunch of excuses. And I'm like, did anyone tell you that you're worth more than this hard stuff? Like, do you want to relax? Like, do you ever want to let your shoulders down? Because I can tell you, you're definitely worth that experience. And so with the toxic charity, I think that we have some of that here in Greenville. I am not your conventional social worker in the sense of you'll have all your paperwork ready to go. You'll meet every checkbox. And I'm like, I just don't think we're going to be able to help you here, because, you seem to budget this into the process. And every 6 months, on the first day after the 6th month, you're back in my office. And I just think that maybe we need to have a bigger conversation. I think that detoxing from charity needs to be considered by nonprofits who are trying to shift the needle a little bit. I think that, we want to sort of, get people off of the dependency piece, and I'm totally on board with that. But I think that we need to give space to kind of the detox from how it's worked. The system is not broken. That bad boy is operating as planned. And, I think that empowerment starts by recognizing where the power has sat in a typical conventional way. And I think that toxic charity is an important conversation starter, but it's a conversation starter. I think that it is where we can jump off from. It's certainly not where we should stay. And, there's a tipping point with removing someone's benefits that needs to be acknowledged. And so I think that Greenville is a really good place if you have all your crap together. And I think that it is a really hard place if one thing is out of line. There are jobs in Greenville if you already have a job. There's a house in Greenville if you've never been evicted. There are utility companies if you don't owe anyone money. You know, there's all sorts of things. And so it's the if that we need to address, I think, and that is where the community sort of power building, I think, is, you know, we need to start bringing our own chairs and just muscling our way into the conversation and to talk about charity in sort of a toxic way, and then talk about the detox on the other end of charity. How do we create that empowerment model? How do we create that sense of self and purpose in the folks that we serve? And to create sort of your next generation movers and shakers, because you know, the same old will work and it will always be pretty effective. But I'm here for when we get some new players at the table and we really see some, you know, innovative ideas, and, you know, we don't give food boxes with prescribed food in them anymore. I don't know if you like beans. Do you want to see if there's something in there that you and your kids like? Yeah, you know what's in your freezer. I don't. Do you have milk? Because there's no sense in me giving you cereal for your kids if you don't have milk. So it's just sort of being willing to take 6 minutes of your life to engage with a person, and, you know, just to, you know, say their name, look them in their eye, give them a hug, even if they don't smell good. Smells go away. It's not, you know, there's no permanent condition in this other than the ones that we don't inspire in people. That's the permanence, is when we stop believing in people. Hopefully that answered your question. I kind of walk around things sometimes.
It hit on some of it. I understand how you feel about it. I just wonder where our thin line is when we start to talk about toxic charity. This was the first year I've ever heard it myself. So I was like, what's toxic charity? I mean, you either gonna do it or you're not, and you need to be moving people away from charity. So I don't know when it becomes toxic. You know,
Right.
I can see when it can become toxic, when I'm bringing you the same people a food box every week and I'm trying to get you a job and you won't take the job and you still expect me to bring food boxes and pay your bills. But you know, but you have to find that line where this person is either not able to go to work and that's why you're still helping them, or they need training or they need driver's license, and that there's an issue that's stopping them from being able to provide for themselves. There's a difference. And I'm like, you have to treat everybody as an individual. You have to get to, like you said, get to know each person, and every situation doesn't fit everybody. I just have to say it like.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope y'all had as much fun and got as much out of your breakout room as I did. I was in a small but mighty group that had both Caroline and Ferris and Lawson Welty, who's going to be speaking at our next event. So I felt like I was fully in a master's class. Katie, thank you for dropping that note about an upcoming event, The Color of Law, that's coming up next. I think it's next week, but it is in the chat. If you haven't registered, it's promising to be great. As I just mentioned, there will be a third session with this. I hope that you are energized and excited enough to plan to come back. I hope that you will reach out to some of our fellow community members who you just think absolutely should be here. As you think about coming back next time, we're really hoping that you'll leave that last session with a toolkit that you can really reach into. One of the things that our session, my breakout group, ended with is this work can be hard. It can be extremely tiring. It is a long time between wins. And I don't say that to bring people down. What we hope is that by working together, by leaning on each other, by leaning into our tribe, as Caroline mentioned, that we're getting strength from one another. And when one person is at a low point, we're helping to bring the other up to a high point. And as we move into our third session, we promise to give you even more time with our speakers. We promise to help you build that toolbox so that you have some tools that you can reach to when you are at a low point, or you can have a tool that will help you get even further when you're at a high point. I want to say a huge thank you to Jessica, to Caroline, to Ferris, to Lauren, through Michael, Sebastian, especially for jumping into the last minute with a quick change to a different language, Sebastian. Who am I missing from our speakers? I feel like I'm missing one more. Oh, Adrian, there you are. Adrian, I see you on my screen. Thank you guys for your time tonight. And if from my facilitation team, anything else I'm missing, I think we're good to go. We hope to see you back in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.